Good morning, friends, and welcome to Countdown to His Coming for a Saturday here in September, where we are facing all kinds of fun between now and especially the elections happening near the end of the year. Of course, those elections are actually cranking up early voting, starting in some of our states even in September. Do you know what you're voting for or against? Well, I think that as we look at the scripture this morning, we're going to see some of these things being played out more than ever before, the deception of the last times. It's the Apostle Paul who warned us in 2 Timothy chapter 3 that hard times will come in the last days. The King James calls them perilous times. And yes, there have been dangers throughout history. Some commentators will say that, this is a reference to all the days from the resurrection of Jesus until his return. Those are the last days. But of course, in the latter part of the last days, all of these things seem to come to a head and they seem to increase. Could we be watching that in our own country? Case in point, what's going on in Springfield, Ohio, as the dance of deception continues across some blue state and liberal media platforms. It seems like they're saying there's nothing to see here. Matter of fact, in an NBC article that was posted just yesterday on my news feed, it claimed that what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have been saying about this pretty little town in Ohio is just a neo-Nazi conspiracy. See, it proves they're Nazis. Don't you vote for them. It was such a whack job of a lying, outright lying article. I thought, how would a supposedly reputable news source like NBC publish such a thing? Well, it wouldn't unless you've got people like Paul describes in this passage running the very news outlet that's in question. People that are lovers of money, not lovers of God, but instead lovers of pleasure. The folks that are without self-control, brutal, reckless, even traitors, it says in this passage. Hey, this is what we've got in full force in our country now. And the picture of our media trying to lead the sheeple off a cliff is just amazing. To try to say, there's not only nothing to see in Springfield, Ohio, but what you do see is actually something that would make you hate these Republicans and not let them ever have your vote. Well, what's actually going on there? Why don't you ask the people of Springfield, Ohio? They met this week to discuss some of the issues they are facing. And in a town meeting, people were sharing their frustrations with what has happened there. And to describe it succinctly, 15,000 Haitian refugees have been dumped there, courtesy of a government program of the Biden-Harris administration, something that has resettled 250,000 of them around our country in various other communities. Well, what's happening there? Well, the same thing that would happen in your community if you suddenly had an influx of several thousand people from another country who aren't citizens, don't know who you are. They're actually here according to our own laws illegally, can't speak your language, may speak as the Haitians do, a type of French, and they're dumped into your municipality where now all of your services are broken because it can't handle the flood. Well, that's what's going on in Springfield, Ohio. I've had the Daily Caller says that the rents in Springfield have gone up 40%. That is, if you can find a place to rent. Why would this happen? Well, because of the interference of the federal government in giving these Haitian migrants rent vouchers. Yes, it's being paid for by your tax money, which is why your money is worth less and less when you try to buy something these days. And because of that, landlords have got to take care of themselves. Of course, they're going to take the higher prices that these vouchers provide for. And now, if you can find a place to rent, which is unlikely, then that place is going to have a 40% higher rent than it had previously. So what's it doing to the normal residents of Ohio that might have wanted to live in Springfield, well, it's driving them elsewhere. The folks that met in that town hall meeting are talking about what has happened to their community. The hospitals are full. You can't get in the emergency room. The schools are overwhelmed, especially with children that don't speak English. The streets are in peril with all the extra people there. Crime has risen. One lady actually testified how her mom was just trying to take out her trash one morning and was struck by a car and killed. A car driven allegedly by a Haitian immigrant who, of course, didn't have a driver's license. These are the kind of things that are happening that the Biden-Harris administration wants to ignore. And they're happening all over the country, and they may be happening under your nose if they have their way, to keep the doors open and keep bringing in people by the millions who are now resettling all over our country. And what's the objective to this? Think about it. By anybody's conservative count, we've now had over 10 million of these folks invade our nation, all against our nation's laws, which our own administration refuses to enforce. And so what's happening? We are being covered up by people who are not just putting stress on the system, but now you've got to find jobs for these people. You hope to find jobs for these people, but don't worry. In the meantime, we give them a free cell phone and give them a paycheck and some other things until they can go to work. And guess what? You know, they're trying to, as Kamala puts it, institute, if she's elected, a brand new mandatory buyback program for your guns. Now, buyback sounds interesting. Oh, they're going to pay you. Oh, but the word mandatory means this is a gun confiscation program, folks. And while she's trying to promote that for your safety, they're actually taking some of these people who are here illegally and who can't communicate well with people who speak English and actually giving them jobs in law enforcement and putting a gun in their hands. Is anybody concerned about this? Well, you should be, because it doesn't make sense. Yeah, this is what's happening to our country in these days, which we would definitely call the last days. But remember, Jesus put it succinctly. He said something would happen before he returned. He said, because of lawlessness, the love of many would grow cold. People would get bitter, angry over the situations they were facing. And yes, because of lawlessness, the Apostle Paul describes the man who's going to be in charge of all this, the big horn who comes up as a little horn of the horns of the beast that many people would call the Antichrist. He's really just one of many antichrists. He's just the head honcho. And Paul calls this man the man of lawlessness. So the man of lawlessness promotes something, right? And what he promotes is enforcing his laws against anybody that doesn't like him or is pushing against this green new kingdom, while he releases the folks that are committing actual crimes and refuses to prosecute them. Wow, that's exactly what's going on right now in many countries around the world, including the United States. Should we expect this to continue? Oh, most certainly, because this fight against evil versus good that's taking place right now, center stage, it's all over the world, is one that's going to continue until Jesus returns. We read this week where yet another historic cathedral in France was set afire, was burned by arson. It's happening all over France now. The attack on Christians, Christian places of worship, and anything that has a cross on it, it's just amazing. With slogans written all over buildings, with the vandalism that's taking place, usually referring to Allah, with people sometimes coming in the middle of events and shouting Allahu Akbar and the like. All over Europe, this is happening. What are the 3 countries that are having the most vandalism of their churches? France, Italy, and Germany. Yeah, those three places of historic Christianity going back to the first century are now experiencing the most devastation. And it seems like local governments and national governments are at least giving lip service to the fact that you want to protect these Christians from persecution, yet at the same time turning a blind eye and looking away and inviting even more what we would call illegals, but more people from other countries that are obviously bringing a different agenda into their midst, bringing these folks in and welcoming them to completely change what's going on in their nation. Is this happening in the United States? Yes, on steroids. And while it's happening, we see people trying to also address the other issue, one that actually both political parties seem to be in agreement on this year. The fact that the declining birth rate in America and other Western countries is a danger. This has been such a danger that it's causing devastation in China, where millions of men, the grown men from that one-child policy that China had when parents had to choose if we only have one child, do we want a boy or a girl? And often they would abort a girl to try for a boy, and now these grown men have no wives. What a devastating situation. China actually lost population last year. They're no longer the most populous nation in the world. That title goes to India. And as we look at what's happening there and many other countries around the world, we're discovering that when the choices can be made in this day and age not to have children, then many are making that choice gladly and saying, I can't afford to have a child. I don't want to have a child. I don't want the responsibility. I can't pay for it. I mean, what's the big deal here? No, I'm not going to have kids. And because of that attitude, we're going to see societies collapse all over our world. Now, what's interesting is Al Mohler even dealt with this in his briefing this week one morning. And we looked at societies like Japan that are having to really push AI technology ahead so that they can have enough robots. That's right. Robots serving in sometimes nursing homes, facilities, medical facilities, and the like, because there aren't enough young people coming up to fill those jobs. That's just a taste of where we're headed if people keep having fewer children. And when we look at that in America, our population has been up. We've got a steady population where the deaths aren't pulling our population down like it should. Why? Because we've had an influx of migrants, people who have no concept of America, don't know what's going on here, but have been allowed in, and many of those have turned out to be criminals. They've been those who now are coming in from gangs like Tren de Aragua from Venezuela and taking over entire apartment communities. It seems like now gangs are fighting gangs in some of our larger cities as some of these groups vie for control of different neighborhoods. Is this going to continue? Unfortunately, unless we stand up, speak up, and try to make a difference in these days, then it will get worse and worse. Now, I believe, folks, that we can have pockets of freedom right up until Jesus comes. Will your community, will your state, will your country be one of them? I hope so. But in the meantime, I'd like to echo what the Apostle John said at the end of the book of Revelation. Even so, Lord Jesus, come.